Welcome everyone to our workshop Governance 101, part of the Small Black-Led and Racialized Organizations online workshop series. My name is Adil Merab, and please note this session is being recorded and will be available on the project webpage early next week. The presentation today and the additional tools and resources are available for download on the project webpage. First, we would like to mention a few housekeeping, engagement, and self-care points for this session. OCASI is committed to supporting full participation and engagement by all attendees at our events, including people with disabilities. This session is facilitated in English, French simultaneous interpretation, American Sign Language, ASL, and Quebec Sign Language, LSQ, and English captioning are available. If you wish to turn on the French simultaneous interpretation, please go to your meeting control toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on the interpretation icon, seen as a globe, and then click on French. If you wish to enable the ASL, American Sign Language, or the Quebec Sign Language, LSQ, also at your meeting control toolbar, click on Interpretation, and under Watch, click ASL for American Sign Language, or FSL, French Sign Language for the LSQ. If you wish to enable the closed caption feature in your meeting controls toolbar, also at the bottom of your Zoom screen, click on Show Caption icon seen as CC. Also, regarding any of those instructions, if you'd like us to repeat, please let us know in the chat and we'll also copy paste them there. Zoom fatigue is real, so do what you need to do to take care of you first. Stay present and be attentive to your body and your emotions. Please keep yourself muted throughout the session. If you have any technical questions, please use the chat feature and to communicate directly with @OCASI chatbox support. And at the end of the session, please fill out the evaluation form that will be shared to help us improve our future workshops. When you leave the session today, automatically your browser will open to that evaluation form. Please take a moment or two to provide us your feedback. It would be very helpful for our future workshops. And please do feel free to use the ask questions, to ask us questions or share your thoughts by writing in the question and answer feature, which will be addressed at the end of this session or in next week's session, question and answer follow-up session. Now, I would like to introduce our trainer for today's workshop, Liben Gebremikael, Chief Executive Officer of TAIBU Community Health Center.
Good afternoon. It is a great honor and privilege to be with you this afternoon to talk about board governance, particularly for within the context of the systemic issues that many organizations who are participating in this training, I'm assuming, will be facing. And so I'm so privileged to be having this presentation with you. I would like to call it an engagement session so that we can have conversation and not so much a training session where I'm going to be downloading information onto you. So I'm hoping we will have time to have some conversation as well. Let me share my screen so I'm able to speak with you, and I'm assuming people are able to see my slides here. So our topic is about effective governance for nonprofit organization It's part of the capacity building program that OCASI has developed. I think it's a very great initiative. It's about building our capacity so we can impact our communities more significantly. We're going to be talking about boards and governance. And as organizations, however big or small we are, boards, you cannot do without them. And organizations usually depend on a board, significantly depend on a board. You can have a great ED or manager or an executive, as we would call. You could have excellent staff. You could have great programs and services in the community. But if you don't have a good board or an effective board or effective governance, it really is a challenge. And that's why I think it's an important component of this capacity building program. And also at the outset, I would like to say that, board and governance are complex. We have big organizations that have big boards, but we are talking here about grassroots community organization, and that makes it very complex. How do we enhance the capacity of small grassroots community organization? And as I tried to highlight earlier on, it's also very difficult when we are working in a system that really impacts the many communities that we would like to serve. Black, indigenous, racialized, newcomers, Francophone communities. That makes it even more difficult to navigate the space of board of directors and governance. So it is within that context that I'm presenting with you today. And so we'll go through some slides and then have some conversation at the end. Obviously, as we start our conversation, it is very important that we root ourselves in who we are and acknowledge the land that we work and live, for those who have family, raise families, and enjoy the environment. And I think it's very important that we ground ourselves in who we are in this space. From TAIBU's perspective, we are located in the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. From an organization perspective and on a personal level, TAIBU has adhered to the principle of indigenous health and indigenous hands. And when it comes to indigenous programs and services, we have facilitated the establishment of an advisory council called the Scarborough Indigenous Wellness Advisory Council. And they are the ones who are making decisions about programs and services related to indigenous communities here in Scarborough. So through that, we are also mindful of the broken covenants, and we stand in solidarity with addressing the barriers that many of the indigenous peoples continue to suffer on this land. As an organization that's also focused on the Black population, it is also our responsibility and duty to stop and reflect on the ancestors who have come before us. It is on their shoulders that we stand, that organizations such as TAIBU is established, is because of the struggle, the success, the resilience that they've shown. And that also applies to me personally as a Black man of African descent, that I pay tribute and honor to those who have come before me. Thank you for allowing me to have this reflection with you. And so a little bit about TAIBU. We are an organization that we have been established about 15 years ago. We celebrated our 15th anniversary this year. And our primary focus and mission is to provide primary healthcare and social services for Black communities across the Greater Toronto area. And we are very deliberate and mindful in terms of how we do our programs based on Afrocentric principles, the anti-Black racism lens, and also looking at systems change, because we know the challenges that Black and racialized communities face are systemic in nature, and we also have to address it from a systemic perspective. And these are the values of the organization that our board of directors has set, including providing leadership, community-driven, Afrocentricity, quality, and equity. So now that we are an accredited organization by the Canadian Center of Accreditation, and we have been recognized for much of the work that we have done over the past 15 years, including the response that we have demonstrated during the COVID pandemic, and also our recent establishment of the Toronto Community Crisis Response Service in partnership with the City of Toronto. It's been 2 years now since the service is in place, and already the work that the crisis response team has delivered has already been recognized. So enough about TAIBU, and maybe start to think about governance and why this training and how did we end up starting this kind of work. As I said earlier, there are certain focuses that we have. I talked about the Afrocentric principles, which I will elaborate a little bit further later on, and then the systemic approaches. And this governance training came about from the Toronto Action Plan to confront anti-Black racism. The action plan had several recommendations, and around health, around youth engagement, around community development. But one area where there was a recommendation was to increase the representation of Black people on different boards of health and social services in the city. I don't think this comes as a surprise for you, but there is a significant underrepresentation of Black people on several boards. And boards are spaces where decisions are made, policies are developed, budgets and resource allocations are finalized, and not being represented in those spaces is a significant challenge from a systemic perspective. So the city wanted to increase the representation of Black people on different boards. But in responding to that call for proposal, TAIBU, in partnership with a few other organizations, including the University of Toronto Scarborough, East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club, and other organization, what we proposed was that it was okay to train Black people around governance and match them with board opportunities. But there were two significant areas where we know we still continue to experience challenges. One was there were a lot of small grassroots community organizations on a voluntary basis, emerging, getting some funding from government or municipality or foundations, and they would do excellent work, but they would die the moment that particular funding ends. We've seen this a number of times. We've seen it during the Youth Challenge Fund. We've seen it when we had the Black Youth Action Plan. So every time there is a challenge and then there is a reaction and there's money available for groups, small grassroots community organizations receive funding, they do excellent work, but they don't thrive because of governance challenges. So we said we want to build capacity for small grassroots community organizations. And on the other side, the other important aspect of representation is so that it doesn't become a tokenistic approach where some organization will recruit 1 or 2 Black people and they'll say, oh, we have 2 Black people on our boards and so we're good. When they have not really done some work as a board or as a leadership team to change the nature of the work, how they do, the culture, the power dynamics, and understanding the impact of anti-Black racism. So this project has 3 components of supporting individuals to become board members at different institutions and organizations, supporting small grassroots community organizations build their capacity around governance, and also changing or influencing existing board spaces and leadership spaces in different health and social services organization. And so today we are focusing on supporting small grassroots community organizations build their governance capacity. This is what I have planned to cover this afternoon, and I'm gonna start rushing quickly. So understanding, nonprofit governance, obviously, what are the functions of board of directors? What are the duties of board of directors? And as we were told earlier on, Zoom can be difficult to focus and stuff. So we will have a short break, and then we'll talk about what makes good governance, what are good documents and instruments that will lead to good governance. And I think it's also very important that we address the issue of systemic racism for many of us, and how does governance look from that perspective, and how can we embed Afrocentric governance in the way that we do things. So if we look at nonprofit sectors, overall in terms of how did nonprofit organizations emerge? They're usually referred at the third sector, and nonprofits started because on the one hand, the government was not responding to the needs of the community or the people or the society. And then on the other side, the business sector or the corporation sector were also not meeting the needs of certain communities. And in order to kind of fill that gap, the nonprofit sector emerged. And if we go, in tradition, like histories, both in Canada and elsewhere, we will see that it started with some communities organizing themselves, a faith-based organization beginning to address some of the issues, whether it was poverty or housing. And that's how the sector has grown. And so when we think about governance in those nonprofit organizations, until very recently, the board responsibility based on the historical progression of nonprofit groups and organizations has been mainly around micromanaging and being involved in the operations of organizations, or focusing on monitoring the operations. Are we doing the right thing? Are we serving the right people? And doing those kind of internal looking process, and then managing all that through various reports and a lot of reports reviewing and stuff. That has been how governance of nonprofit organization has been until recent times. More so now, and particularly in the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a shift towards the understanding of governance more than just monitoring and overseeing the operations of the organization, but looking at bigger pictures and having some kind of visioning and generative conversation, which we cover around that. And so the shift from looking inside to looking ahead and to looking around is something fairly new. And as we know from many grassroots community organizations, because of this and because of capacity, we always tend to be looking internally most of the time. And that's why governance becomes a complex issue. I think we want to balance the role of a board or the role of directors to be able to be effective in what they do, in addition to looking internally and monitoring the operations of the organizations. What else do they need to do, and how equally are important these functions? And then more recently now, we're also seeing conversations around governance from an Afrocentric lens, and bringing the principles of Afrocentricity and other African values and traditions, because knowing that for many communities, both in the African or Black communities context, or people of African descent, or other traditions and cultures, governing has existed in different ways. It's not something new, and it's not necessarily a European thing or a Eurocentric model. governing communities, governing neighborhoods, governing nations has existed in our traditions. And it's very important that we bring those values in how we do things today. And as we go through the conversation, you will see how much that is going to be very important as a grassroots community organization serving marginalized and racialized communities. So if I was asked to ask people, maybe if you're okay to just put in the chat, what is the function of the board, or what does the board actually do? If we could just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes for people to just put in their chat to say what comes to mind when you think about the board. What is their function? Very quickly. Just one word, or nobody wants to dare? What does a board do? Okay, we have something. Lead. Thank you, Rosemary. Anybody else?
Make sure that the board is following, or the board has to make sure that the team is following the mission and vision of the organization.
All right, nice, good, thank you. And then I have coordinate, ensure the organization is operating according to its mandate. Thank you. Anything else? All right. So essentially, if we are to group the role of a board, there are 3 essential functions or areas of work that the board, like a board does. And you know, I appreciate Rosemary's comment about leading, right? So the board's role is governing, but governing as a leader of the organization, right? So that's very important. And these 3 roles are usually called fiduciary, strategic, and, as I was telling you earlier on, more recent times, generative. And very few boards are really doing the generative function. Is mainly fiduciary and strategic. And what do we mean by fiduciary? So fiduciary meaning necessarily it's an oversight function. People said that we have to make sure that the organization meets the objective of the mission and vision and mandate of the organization. So making sure that that is happening. You know, what are we doing? And looking at, you know, are we supporting our staff correctly? Are we, do we have necessary resources to do the work, right? Financial, you know, oversight is one of the key areas and sensitive areas for boards, but it involves, you know, human resources, volunteers, clients, programs and services, and saying, okay, are we doing what we're supposed to do? And in some cases, or some boards, it would be, are we doing what we're supposed to do in, you know, with quality, right? So quality improvement, risk, do we have any risk? Those kind of things are what we call the fiduciary responsibilities of the board. And many boards do that with no significant challenges or gaps, I would say. The second one is the strategic component, and that is more looking ahead and doing the planning. And where are we going? What is the vision of this organization in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? Where are we going to go, and how are we going to get there? So the strategic plan exercise, the operational plan, if you have a staff that will implement the strategic plan, those kind of functions, roles comes within the strategic role and function. The generative function, which is something very, recent, as I said to you, is really asking the questions of, and why are we doing this? We're monitoring our finances, we're monitoring our programs, but why are we really doing this? And that is an ongoing conversation that the board should have to be able to keep the organization alive, so to speak. Because if an organization is really stagnant and really not moving forward and reliving and re-energizing itself, chances are growth would be limited. And we'll talk about more about these three functions when we're talking about good governance. But essentially, these three areas, right? One is about conformance and saying, are we doing the right thing? Are we following all the rules and regulations? Are we meeting our obligations around reporting and things like that, whether it's CRA, whether it's legislation and things, areas. And then it's about control of the organization's activities, right? So that's one component. The other one is around direction setting, and that is also a significant role of boards, is saying, this is where we're going to go, and here is our journey, here is our plan, and that is going to be very important. And then the third generative is about sense making, right? And we'll talk more about this. But one thing I will say here is, as you can see, the generative is the kind of the base of this triangle. And the reason why, people who have developed this concept have put it as the base is because it's very foundational. But we'll talk more about this. I just wanted to set the context for board roles are fiduciary, strategic, and generative. And there are different ways of presenting this, as I will show you, right? So we talked about fiduciary, meaning oversight and looking within the organization. Strategic foresight looks ahead. And generative is insight and looks at rationale, mandate, purpose, and asking the question why this is important for us. And for good governance, always asking this question and why is going to keep the board focused on the vision, mission, and the mandate of the organization as the organization. Other ways of describing it, at least at TAIBU, here is what we propose is there are kind of three functions as we spoke about. It's like the planning, the board plans, strategic direction, things like that. The board oversees, which is about the fiduciary responsibilities, and the board engages. It engages the staff, it engages the volunteers, it engages the community, it engages the other stakeholders. That's also the responsibility of the board. The board, as the image and representation of the organization, has to engage with different stakeholders. It could be communities, it could be political elected officials, partners and organization. That's how the board functions and communicates and engages and partners with different organizations from a high level perspective. At TAIBU, we've also added this concept of the board also needs to preserve itself. And part of the conversation when we develop these four functions of the board is it's very important that we look at how we do things. And as you probably may know, a lot of small grassroots community organizations get challenged by what happens within a board dynamics and what happens in the board. As I told you earlier on, you could have an excellent ED, CEO, or executive. You could have great staff. You could have great programs. But if your board is not functional and you don't have good governance, the chances that that organization is going to thrive is very difficult. So the board needs to preserve its culture, its good governance, and that's why we've added this fourth function of the board of preserving itself, and then we'll talk more about this. So when we talk about responsibilities, it's very important that we understand from a legal perspective, because as an organization, as an entity, When you organize yourself as board or you organize your board, that becomes a legal entity. And there are certain legal responsibilities that you have to discharge. And this is what the law under the Incorporation Act would provide you, that board of directors have the following legal responsibilities. Directors have to the duty to act honestly. These are very important legal consideration, but also principles as well. Directors must deal with honesty with the corporation. You have to deal with conflict of interest, and you must not act fraudulently. So this is about moral principles, ethics that board should have. So you have a duty to act honestly. You also have a duty of loyalty, which means your loyalty is to the organization or to the corporation. Your sole interest as a director is the interest of the corporation. And these are very important principles, right? When challenges come, when different perspectives arise within the board, this is what would ground the conversation and also the resolution. That any director on the board is there to advance the interest of the corporation and not the interest of self or the interest of other parties. The interest of the director must not be placed in conflict with those of the corporation. You have to put your interest aside and only focus on the interest of the corporation. And that's very, very important as a board. Then we have the duty of diligence or duty to act in good faith, right? So directors must be diligent in attending to their legal duties. I didn't know is not an excuse or a justification. So in order to act in good faith, you have to have good information for you to be able to make the right decision. You have to be diligent in attending to your legal duties. What are the duties under the Ontario Non-Profit Corporation Act? What is our duty under the, if you are a charity, then under the Canadian Revenue Agency? All those duties legally need to be clear for all directors so that they can act in good faith. Then there is the duty to exercise power, meaning you are responsible for managing the corporation, and so you have to take decisions. You may delegate certain responsibilities or authority to the staff if you have staff, which is what the relationship between the board and ED, CEO, or executive is going to be. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for those delegated authorities and decisions. And directors must hold funds collected from public interest for designated charitable purposes. So the management of the finances of the corporation is, lies on the board of directors, and you are responsible to exercise power in those areas as well. And then duty of obedience. Directors must comply with all applicable legislation and the corporate's governing documents. We'll talk about those. So, you cannot act outside of legal obligations, but also outside of the organization's, letter of patents or bylaws or policies and procedures. You need to abide by those. And then the duty to avoid conflict of interest, that's again raised a second time here, is because conflict of interest happens a lot of times and needs to be handled in a very sensitive way. A lot of people, think about conflict of interest and try to avoid conflict of interest per se, but there are ways that you have to avoid conflict, or you can deal with conflict of interest. There are different ways of dealing with conflict of interest, and we'll talk about it. And if you have clear guidelines and policies to say when conflict of interest arises, these are the steps that we need to take, then the board can effectively address the issue that comes out of conflict of interest. And then duty to continue is the other legal responsibilities as set out by legislation. Directors have continuing obligation to the corporation, which cannot be relieved by resignation, can only resign from the corporate where there are adequate individuals to replace the resigning director. So if there are no, like you have resignation does not, relieve you of your duties, at least until such time that the organization has existed. And also you have to make sure that there's going to be continuation of the work of the corporation for you to be able to resign. If there are no continue or possibilities of continuation, then we get to the area of what we call dissolution, right? If there is no continuation, then the only opportunity left for the corporation is to dissolve itself. But otherwise, board of directors have a duty to continue the work of the corporation. We'll go into details when we talk about good governance. Right now, I'm just listing all the responsibilities and duties of board of directors and what we mean by board of directors. And we started from the high context of fiduciary, strategic, and generative. So what does this all mean in some of the activities that we saw with boards? Is the board is responsible to develop, craft the mission and vision and values and purpose of the organization. That is what the board does. It sets those high level vision, mission, mandate, and values. And that is done through strategic planning. We can talk about that. The board is responsible to hire and support, supervise, and evaluate the chief executive. That could be the ED, the CEO, or whoever is the staff. And we'll talk about that also, because sometimes that's where challenges happen within board and relationship with executives. The board does make sure that there is adequate and effective planning. That includes their own strategic planning, but also the planning for the operations of the organization. That's how the board would be able to oversee and monitor what the organization is doing. So there should be a proper planning of high-level strategic areas, but also operational areas. It doesn't mean that the board will develop the operational plan if they have staff, but it directs and says, I need to see the organizational planning and how is that going to be reported, so I can make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to do. The other element is also ensuring that the organization has adequate services. This is also going to be very, very important. An organization ensuring that in order to do the work, there is adequate resources, both financial resources, human resources, volunteer resources, equipment, supplies, and things like that. That's the overall responsibility. How does it do that? We'll talk about that. And not only ensuring that there's adequate resources, but the resources are also managed effectively, right? So through a budgeting process, a reporting process, and doing other analysis around financial, return on investment and things like that. Determine, monitor, and strengthen the organization's programs and services. And then now we move into the engagement process, whereby the board is responsible for the organization's public standing. So making sure that the organization has a good reputation out there. There are no risks to reputation. There is a good standing in the public. There is trust in the public, and things like that. That would be the role of the board. Of course, legal and ethical integrity and maintaining accountability both internally but also externally. So accountability could be through reporting to the CRA. It could be reporting to funders. It could be reporting to the community. These are accountability measures that the board has. And recruiting and orienting new members and assessing board performance. So very broadly, here is a list of high-level responsibilities of the board for an organization. So when we say the board plans, It is the responsibility of the board to develop strategic plan and direction and priorities within that. It's always suggested to have a 3 to 5 years plan, a strategic plan, and the strategic plan has to be very high level and identifying in the next 3 years 3 or 4 main priorities. These are the areas where we're going to be working on. You know, it used to be 5 years. Now a lot of organizations are tending to do a 3-year plan because environment is changing too quickly. And so they're suggesting to have 3-year plans. TAIBU's current plan is about 5 years plan with the 10-year vision. And we have 3 priorities. One priority is expanding and deepening our programs and services so we can reach more people. That's what the board identified as one priority. The second priority is about influencing the health and social service ecosystem. And the reason is because TAIBU cannot be everywhere. We only are one office. Like we can't do, you know, a lot by increasing our capacity. But what we can do is by influencing certain health services and certain social services and making sure that what they do meets the needs of the Black community. So that was the second priority. And the third priority the board said was, in order for us to move to the next phase of our 15 years, we need to have a stronger organization with good capacity and building our legacy. And so the board wanted to have an internal review and see how is our structure right now set up. Are we able to move to the next phase of the organization's life? So 3 priorities: expand and deepen services, influence social service and health service sectors, and build a capacity internally for the organization, right? So they're very, very clear, specific, and priorities that we have. And then the second thing then is for the board to make sure that this plan that this board has said, okay, this is what we want to achieve in the next 5 years. How is that going to be implemented? And so if groups or organizations have a staff, then that is what is called the implementation of that strategic plan or an operational plan has to be developed. And the board has to review that and say, yes, we are comfortable that what we set as strategic directions, this operational plans will get us there. And then the board will receive regular update around how that operational plan is being implemented. So that's another function of the board. And then the board also has to have its own plan and has to have a calendar during the year. What are we going to do? Are we going to have professional development? When are we going to have them? Are we going to have invited guests at our board meeting to come and talk to us about what is happening in the community? When are we going to do a risk assessment? When are we going to monitor our financial status, right? Do we receive them on a monthly basis? Do we do it on a quarterly basis? So the board should develop a clear calendar that all board of directors or member of the board would know when things are happening. And so there is an actual plan for the whole year that the board has set. It doesn't mean that there are not going to be other emerging plans or something that you have to include, but a board calendar has to be developed by the board that will need to be followed. And so it's not like, oh, what are we going to talk about next month? It has to be set during the year so that there is an effective planning and follow-up and monitoring of the board activities and the organization activities. The board overseeing functions, what it does is, again, reviewing reports. So we talked about the board may have its own committees. So receiving the committee reports, operational reports, financial report, which is very important, risk and compliance report. This is also the responsibility of the board to identify any risk and that there are mitigating strategies to do this with regard to the risk and compliance. Are we compliant with all our regulations and legislations? Those are the reports that come to the board that allows them to know that the organization is functioning as per their direction and as per the legislation requirements out there. And obviously an annual report, which is more a report to the stakeholders, their communities, and what we call the moral owners. The board has to provide a report to say this is what we've done during the year. So the planning, the overseeing, and then the board engages, as I said earlier on. The board are representative of the organizations. They are also the ambassadors, right? And so, and they have influence, and also are connected to influence or should connect to influence. Something that I have not seen here in the Canadian context, or at least in our sector, which is the health and social services sector, and particularly grassroots community organizations or Black-led organizations. Most of the people that we recruit or we tend to commit ourselves to being on board is because of the committed passion and dedication we have to serve our communities. And that is the kind of main criteria, if you like, that I have seen or observed. In other spaces, and particularly what I've seen in the States, is that members of the board of directors come into an organization because they have influence. Either they have financial influence, so they bring their own financial situation or position into the board to help that organization, or they have connection to influence. And so they join a board because they have some connection to influence, and they bring resources, financial resources, technical resources, connection to different people and organizations. And that should be the role of board of directors. But here in our context, that may be difficult because many of us come into a board because we are committed to say, I want to support this organization. But having that in mind is going to be very important. Thinking about the ambassador and promoting the organization, and making sure that there's good relationship out there with communities, with systems, with other foundations and corporations, with elected officials. That is the role of the board, to make sure that the organization is known for the work that they do. Whenever there is a need, they can connect to those influences, but also can bring their own influences into the organization. It could be their expertise, right, in the work that they do in their professional, like if you are a lawyer, you may want to join a board because you want to make sure that that legal component of organizing that group is going to be helpful. Or if you are in the financial field, you want to come in to make sure that the finances are well managed and stuff. So you bring influence, but you're also connected to influence as a board member. And so this is the role of what the board needs to do. And we'll talk about the board preservation afterwards. Now, in our context, and I don't know how many of you have different governance models. We'll talk about it, but essentially we have three main type of boards, right? We have what we call a working board, and usually very, very high prevalence of working boards in small grassroots community organizations. There is what we call the advisory board, and then there is what is called the policy or governing. Very high level of categories. The working board is really, there's no staff. A group of people have come together to establish an organization because there is a need out there and they want to meet that need. And they get together, they incorporate, they get this organization, they have some ideas about what this values and mission and vision is going to be. But because they don't have any staff, the board actually does the work and does the governing. And many grassroots community organizations start like this. It starts with a few people coming together and establishing an organization and doing the work. Now, the challenge with this working board is that the board has to do two main functions. One is to govern the organization based on all the responsibility that we spoke about earlier on. But at the same time, they have to do the work on the ground. They are the ones who are seeing the clients. They are the one who's helping volunteering and creating events and stuff like that, right? So it's always a very difficult balance to keep. to govern and to do operations. And the two get mixed up a lot. And that's why a lot of times organizations do not really thrive and grow and come out of that cycle, because they're dragged towards the operations and do most of the work, and they're running around and doing all the stuff. They don't even have enough board members. There may be 4 or 5 of them and stuff like that. And they're not doing their planning, and they're not doing their engaging, and they're not doing their overseeing and stuff. So it's a very difficult position to be in, but they are very highly functional. We know, at least I know in the newcomers and refugees sector, there are so many volunteer-led organizations who are doing so great work out there to serve communities, even better than organizations such as TAIBU or big, organizations, other big organizations. But the challenge is, because that governance piece is not really strengthened, they're not able to kind of progress into this expansion and transition into an organization that has staff with a working board. It's very challenging, but it's possible. And that's some of the work that we do here at TAIBU in building the capacity of small grassroots community organization to transition from a working board to a policy or governing. The advisory board is really an advisory board. They don't necessarily have any vested, they don't have any legal obligation on the organization. They're just part of a group of advisors, and either a board of an organization or an executive of an organization can come and seek advice to say, we have these challenges, how do we solve them? We have this plan, how can we implement it? We have this opportunity, how do we take advantage of it? And they come to this advisory board for advice, but the advisory board does not have any authority on its own to the organization or any legal obligation on the organization. Usually this is an advisory board on the side of either an existing board or an executive. But this is the governance model that would be very helpful. And if there is a staff, whether we call it a CEO or an ED or an executive, you cannot have a staff and also have a working board. And I've seen organizations such as this where they have a staff, but they're also a working board. And that creates a lot of challenges for the organization. But when we talk about the policy board or a governance board or governing board, is that there are certain areas where the board is going to be responsible, and there are certain areas where the CEO, ED, executive staff is responsible, and the two relationships are managed through direction around policies and having a trusted relationship where there's going to be a reporting period. So the board directs operation by developing policies which guide operational decisions. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I wanted to bring this 3 different concepts of boards. And usually, the 2 boards, the governance board, policy board, and the working board are the ones that I usually see. And the transition between the 2 is a significant one. And all the things that we talked about earlier on, in terms of setting the mission and doing overseeing and planning, doing strategic planning, all those kind of things are relevant to both the working board and the governance board. The only difference is in the working board, you don't have any staff to be able to execute the plan and the engagement that the board establishes. But if you have a staff, then you need to have or adopt a policy or a policy governance board. I'm going to pause here for some check-in to see where we are, and also check our time. So we have a little bit of time. Maybe we can take about 5 minutes break, but I just wanted to check in and see if people have any questions. Are there any comments? Are there any questions that maybe when I go into some of the good governance details, I can touch upon so that it answers some of your expectations and questions? Okay, I think it could mean two things. It could mean that everything is clear, we're good, or we're not sure. So it's okay. We still have another half an hour or so to go into further details. So if I can ask, it's 12:57. If we can come back at 1:05, that will at least give us about 7 minutes of a bio break and stretch. Maybe get a cup of tea or cup of coffee, and then I will complete the remaining components of our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Liben. We'll see everyone back at 1:05.
Okay, it's 1:05. Hope we can come back. Just realized I have a few slides to cover, so I'm gonna run a little bit faster, so that at least at the end there are going to be some opportunities for questions. So hope it will not be too difficult to follow up. But I'll try to cover as quickly as possible without, yeah, so I apologize for that. All right. So, at TAIBU, we tend to kind of use Afrocentric values, principles, and proverbs to guide our thinking and our conversation. And so, I'm just putting this proverb there that we all know: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's what the space of a board is about. This is about going together, and this is about coming together, and this is about our unity and things like that. So that's how good governance is created. The culture of good governance is created. Is about, we have a destination, we are going somewhere, but we're going together, is the idea here. So what are the kind of key elements around a good governance? We talked about these three governance duties: the fiduciary, the strategic, and the generative. And if we look at each areas, you will see some of the questions that each area asks, right? So around fiduciary responsibilities, the board would always ask and find out if there is anything wrong or what is wrong, and defining the problem and identifying the problem, right? If it's a strategic conversation, the question would be, what's the plan? Where are we going? What are we doing? Right? And then solving the problem and shaping strategy, right? And the problems are to be solved. When it's generative, the question is, what is the question? And then framing of problems or making sense of problems is what we're trying to do. That's why the generative conversation that the board has to have is very important. If it's always solving the problem and looking at what is wrong, or planning and not really framing problems in such a way that it makes sense for the board, for the organization at the time, is going to be a challenge. And then around fiduciary, the decision making is about resolution. The board sees their role as oversight and authority, and the performance metrics are guided by facts, figure, finances, and reports, and things like that. When dealing with strategic issues or having a strategic perspective or lens, the decision is about reaching consensus. The board sees their role as a strategist and thinking ahead. And then the metrics are indicators, strategic indicators. When you're talking about generative, the decision making is actually framing the question and continuing the conversation. The board sees their role as an agent of fresh perspective and bringing new ideas and new, conversation into the board's role and the organization's function. And the performance metrics is about learning and discerning and growing, right? So, when we talk about these different roles, these three different roles, they're all important. They're all equally important, but what we're lacking in many cases is about this generative function and generative conversation. And there is no learning, and there is no discerning, and there is no growth in organization. This function of the board, if developed well and consistently, will help the organization to refresh itself, grow, and frame new possibilities and new opportunities. That's why these three functions are very important. And as I showed you earlier on, the base of that funding of that functions is the generative conversation and insight the board creates for itself, for the organization, and that would lead on how the board engages with other groups and services. The other key component of a good governance is always to think about its ultimate accountability. right? So we have a board of directors, and they are managing or monitoring or governing this organization, the staff, the volunteers, the services. But the ultimate accountability is about the objective and mission of that organization, and it's about the people being served. If the board always keeps in its mind, in its perspective, in its vision, the health and well-being of the communities being served, that keeps the board really focused on what it is doing. It's not just about an organization and the finances. This is about the people. And that would help us to remember, if you remember the list of those duties that we talked about, the duty of honesty, the duty of loyalty, the duty of responsibility and continuance and stuff, always keeping who the moral owners or the communities or the clients, however we term it in our group, keeping them as our accountable body will keep a good board function in a way that, because the board is managing an organization or governing an organization, but in actual fact, it is doing so because it is serving some communities. And ultimately, it is the communities that needs to keep the board accountable. The board is accountable to its members. As we talk about the bylaws and stuff, that's this instrument that makes the board accountable to its members, right? We have legal responsibilities from the government. If you are incorporated and you're a charity, you have those accountability measures. Downward is our accountability to our members and moral owners, who are the key stakeholders of the organization. And keeping that in view when making decisions, when having conversations, is going to be very important for us to develop good governance. Sometimes we miss that, and we are immersed in all the organization and the budget and the things. We need to bring the communities that we serve in our conversation at all times to keep us as good governors and board of directors. So in order to have some good governance, these are instruments and documents and processes that we need to keep very active in our organization. Obviously, the articles of incorporation or the bylaws are very foundational. When you incorporate as an organization, you have to have those articles of incorporation, and you have to have your bylaws. We all know that the Incorporation Act in Ontario has changed, and we have a year, I think by November 2024, the new Ontario Nonprofit Corporation Act is going to be effective. Any new organization that are being established now has to follow the new rules and regulations. Existing organizations have to align with the new Corporations Act before October 2024. But the bylaws establishes how the board and the members function, how the members or the board is accountable to the members, how our meetings done, how our boards selected and recruited, how our boards functioning, what is their limits of authority, how do they do this? All those kind of things are must be clearly defined in the bylaws. We have to have policies and procedures. This is also very important, and I'll talk about that. You know, in many organizations, the board also has a code of conduct. The code of conduct establishes the ways the board will perform their duties, and also how they're going to be behaving themselves in board meetings or representing the organization. And we do get all our board members every year, even if they have been a board member last year, to sign a code of conduct, because it sets the tone for how boards are going to interact when they come together. The confidentiality pledge is also something that we get boards to sign, and you should have one too. And that's also very important. It's about trust, and any discussions happening at the board are confidential. And that is going to be very important to keep. Conflict of interest, we talked about that. And conflict of interest is always making sure that the interest of the corporation is at the heart of all decisions. It doesn't mean that sometimes we have influence and stuff like that. And when that arises and there seems to be perceived or real conflict of interest, there is a process whereby that conflict of interest is declared, and there is a process whereby that conflict of interest is managed. So if, for example, I work at an organization and there is a potential business transaction or agreement that is going to be signed that has certain benefits, I should refrain from definitely decision making. And in some organizations, they also refrain themselves from participating in conversations. That way, that conflict of interest is not hindering the process of following through business decisions. So these are set things that you should have, or an organization has to have, for its board of governance. And then recruitment, and the reason why I put that in red, is also a very important aspect for good governance. How you do your recruitment, how you vet the people that you bring in into the organization, whether it is their skills, definitely their lived experience that aligns with the mission and vision of the organization, and having a process whereby that is sorted out is going to be very important to have some very good governance. The bylaws, as I said, it gives you a structure. It outlines the rights of the participants and the members, and it also provides the procedure by which rights can be exercised. It talks about the members, it talks about the board of directors, it talks about officers and committees and fiscal matters. And that is always good to have, and everybody should be well aware of that. And when challenges come, you always have somewhere to fall and say, according to our bylaws, this is what we are supposed to do, and this is our requirement legally to do this. And so you can always revert back to your bylaws. In actual fact, many organizations have their bylaws and policies and procedures at every meeting so that they can refer back to it. So all board members bring their bylaws and policies and procedures at every meeting. So if there are any questions to be asked or resolved, they can always refer back and say, well, in our policies, it says X, Y, and Z. So talking about policies and procedures, it's very important to have well set policies and procedures for the board, not just for the operation, but for the board. Outlining the mission and vision and policy statements about the organization. Executive limitation. What is the executive allowed and not allowed to do, and how, right? This is very important. Governance processes. What are the commitments of the board? How does the board function, and how does it conduct itself? What are the code of conduct? What are the confidentiality? All those kind of things are going to be outlined in this policy and procedure. The board executive relationship. This is key for any organization to succeed. There should be a very trusted and respectful relationship between the board and the executive, whether it's ED or CEO. If the relationship is not based on trust and respect, it's going to be a challenge. So that's very important, and that should be well established in a policy statement and in a procedure to say, when this happens, this is what we have to do. How do we hire an executive? What are the succession planning? How do staff access the board? All those kind of things have to be set out there. Because if you don't have that, then it's going to be very difficult to manage the organization. And then other relevant policies around staff's rights, clients' rights, volunteer rights and responsibilities, political non-partisanship. What do you do as a board during elections? Do you go, like all those kind of things need to be set out in a policy. Everybody knows what needs to be done, how it is to be done. And if there are questions, you always have something to fall upon and say, no, we cannot do this because this is how our bylaw says, or this is how our policy says. And if people are interested around policy and procedures development and stuff, TAIBU is very happy to support any of the organizations attending this session today. Sometimes what also we do is we put the mission and vision of the organization on all our agendas. And in some organizations, they actually have table mats that outlines the vision, mission, and some of the key principles, so that everybody, when every board member comes to that meeting, they are always reminded of why they are there by looking at the mission and vision and some of the key principles that the board has set. It reminds people, it grounds people, and you can always avoid the personnel to say, well, here it says in our policies, this is how we have to deal with it, right? So And now coming to this board preserve, which is quite important. It's always board issues are going to arise. We need to anticipate and prepare for those issues. Why are they going to happen? Is because number one, we're bringing different membership and different perspective into one space. So they're going to be different perspective being voiced. People are coming with passion and commitment. So they're going to be engaged and vested in the ideas or perspective that they're going to bring in. So that creates the potential for different perspective coming into it's also a democratic process where you have your voice, you have your voting, you have consensus building and stuff like that. So because of that process, it is expected to have this challenge, right? And then sometimes what board members and other people do not realize is the board of directors is a shared leadership role and responsibilities. It is shared. No one member of the board has more power or authority than the others. It is a shared leadership. We have to always remember that. With that in mind, I would like to talk about a couple of things. There are certain things that we need to avoid. So one, for example, is where there are politics, right? That's not a very good space. There is no common vision or understanding or coming together. There are different groups. Sometimes there are side conversation happening. When you see this kind of things, you can really know that this is not really a very good governance space, and personal agendas are coming into the space. As we said, the duty is to the interest of the corporation. Or on the other hand, if you have very passive interaction with board members, it's just like, there's no poor attendance, there's no voices bringing in. It's like, okay, yes, we're comfortable with one person leading, usually the founding members, if there are founding members, and nobody is really actively participating. That's also a very dangerous situation for impacting the good governance. Good governance has to be harmonious, meaning the different voices are entertained and there's rich conversation and discussion, but it always comes back to a consensus and, if necessary, a vote. As we said, if there is a team spirit and there's only one interest, one goal, one vision, and our accountability to our moral owners and the communities that we serve, that is also something that will bring harmony into them, right? We need excellent leaders of the board, right? Usually the chair is considered to be the leader, but the chair is not the decision maker. The chair or president's role is about facilitating this harmony within the board. Many times in a lot of boards, the chair is regarded as the decision maker, and that's where we get a challenge, right? It's about the journey. It's about continuous improvement through evaluation and board education, right? A study that was done in the early 80s, in the mid 80s, identified about 5 areas where board challenges and conflicts arise: the data conflict, interest conflict, relationship conflict, structural conflict, and value conflict. And so what we try to do is, if there is data conflict, then the board needs to work around getting good information, the right information, through reporting or requesting and saying, we need more information before we can make a decision on this issue or this item. Instead of continuing the conversation, if there is a data issue, then we need to get the information and the right information to make decision. If it is an interest situation, then going back to our values, vision, and mission, going back to our role as duties of board of directors and saying, what is the interest of the corporation? And we have a duty to advance the interest of the corporation, having those conversations. If it is a relationship conflict, then our code of conduct will come into place and say, we have a code of conduct. We have all signed around the code of conduct. This is not the way we should be engaging. This is how we have to do that. And even sometimes involving and bringing external third-party people to facilitate engagement and communication with the board will be very important. If it is structural conflict, again, very important to go back and clarify roles and bringing effective policies and procedures into place will be very important. And then if it's value conflict, and especially in many of our community organizations and for TAIBU's perspective, is bringing that cultural value that we ascribe to bring that into the conversation will be important. So we talk about Afrocentric values.
Liben,
Yes.
so sorry for interrupting. It's 1:25. So I
Yeah.
was wondering, we have 5 minutes. Maybe we can conclude for today's session and continue the other section next week, next Thursday.
Oh,
If that's okay.
I think it's okay. Is that yeah, definitely. I mean, probably it's even better because it will stop me from rushing and not really getting into the details conversation.
Yes.
And then we can do recap and then continue from where we started. I totally agree. Thank you, Adel.
Thank you, Liben, and thank you, TAIBU. And I was wondering if you have any last comment, any last thing you would like to say to our participants today, especially that in a few days we also have the deadline for the CFP, which I
Yes.
believe many of our participants are working on.
Yeah. So I think number one, thank you very much for your time. Number two, good luck for everybody who's going to be applying. I know the process is challenging and stuff, so I'm wishing everybody good luck. I think you know, if there are questions, and I'm sure there are questions around that about capacity of organizations in the application, that would be the space where to include how the board functions and what the strong governance will help to implement the programs and stuff. So that is also a quick tip that I can share with. And then finally, I look forward to continuing the conversation, particularly tying up this now good governance and bringing the conversation around Afrocentric values and what that means to good governance as well. And I look forward to session 2 as well. And thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Liben, and thank you, TAIBU, for this well-needed session. For next week, we will continue where we were, and we hope to have it, as Liben have mentioned earlier in the beginning of the session, provide engagement. So please do come next week with your questions, with your experience, maybe if you'd like to share, and we can talk about the kind of obstacles that you've been facing regarding the governance of your organization. And finally, I would like to say thank you, Liben, for the time and for the presentation. Thank you for our interpreters, our French simultaneous interpreters, our ASL and our LSQ and our caption writer. Thank you for OCASI staff for being here to support with the technicalities, and thank you, our participants who've attended, whether this is your first session you're attending or you've been with us from the beginning of this series. And yeah, thank you again. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Bye.